Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful and so chilly neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts, in the shadow of the Great Blue Hills. We are so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is John Edelson. He is the founder and CEO of Time4Learning. He has some great ideas about education. Before we invite John into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Quick Affirmations for Super Busy Women and Quick Affirmations for Super Busy Men, a great new project from our friends Yobi Q and Kim Ann. How would you like a one-way ticket to a brighter, happier life? When you notice life's challenges are getting you down, it's important to step back and take time to reflect. Say goodbye to negativity and say hello to a more positive mindset. According to psychologists, regularly reading positive affirmations can support you to revolutionize your mindset, choosing positivity over negativity and learning to navigate the world with optimism. By repeating affirmations, you can make long-term changes to the way you think and feel, cultivating perspectives that promote happiness, abundance, and growth. And you can do that with this great new project from our friends Yobi Q and Kim Ann, Quick Affirmations for Super Busy Women and Quick Affirmations for Super Busy Men. You can pre-order this wonderful product by going to Kickstarter.com and searching out Quick Affirmation Book Series for Super Busy Women and Men. Joining us right now from sunny Fort Lauderdale in Florida, where I am sure it is a lot warmer than it is here in Boston. Our guest today is here from Time4Learning.com. He's going to talk to us about about something that there's a lot of misunderstanding about, the issue of homeschooling. Please welcome to the show, John Edelson. Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Jed, very good. I'm pleased to be here.
I'm excited to be here. I just discovered that John and I have something in common. We both have magic clowns on our resume.
In high school, while all the other kids were working at McDonald's and stuff, somehow I started working as a magician. And I would do a children's party almost every weekend, sometimes 2 or 3. And it was just a fantastic part of my background. I really liked doing that.
So how did you go from being a magic clown to leading a Time4Learning?
Well, that's a long story. I could summarize my background quickly. I went to school in New Haven. I went to Yale. I then spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in West Africa, which was a fantastic experience. I came back and then I had a conventional business career, including getting an MBA. When about 30, I moved out to Silicon Valley. I got deeply involved in computer graphics when these were brand new. So I spent time visiting Pixar. I was at a company called Silicon Graphics, and this was when virtual reality and 3D graphics was being developed. I followed some engineers from there into an early multimedia video company. And by video, I mean video games. So I was actually in the video game industry for about a decade. And I produced a game. I was an executive producer on a game on the PlayStation that went platinum.
Awesome.
Which I'm inordinately proud of. It's a game called Croc, Legend of the Gobos. So I spent a fair amount of time in the video game industry and then drifted into deeper high tech. Following the big high tech crash in 2001, I found myself free and for family reasons had moved abruptly to Florida. So it was a little hard finding anyone who could employ someone who was so deep in technology. So I got to think, okay, what do I want to do? Let's try and start a company, something I can spend the rest of my career on. What would really matter to me? What would I love to do? And where's there a good opportunity to serve people. And I considered a lot of ideas. I really liked the idea of entertainment and kids. And eventually I focused on the fact that education for kids at home was a huge opportunity. And so I focused on that. My timing was very lucky. You could say it was impeccable, but frankly, it was luck. That I was there at the end of the modem era, just when this broadband stuff was showing up, the always-on high-speed access. And I built a solution that required high-speed access. For the first year or two, it was very frustrating. A lot of people with modems tried to use me, and mostly it didn't work. But then the world relatively quickly switched to broadband, and I was about the only vendor out there with really good, high-quality multimedia education that could be delivered across the new version of the web. So that's how I got started. It was a self-funded startup. I did it in my living room, hired engineers and other people to come to the house, and I built a direct-to-the-family online education service. And it was just at the moment when homeschooling was beginning to get big. Mm-hmm. It was getting close to having 0.5% of the population homeschooling. Wow. And that's just the very start of the takeoff. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
That was back in 2004.
So you mentioned that you got into this when the percentage of kids, it was 0.5% of families who were involved in homeschooling. What's the percentage of families involved in homeschooling now?
Oh, that's a really interesting and somewhat astonishing point. The U.S. Census Bureau this spring, did a big study, and they said over 10% of the K-12 students are now being homeschooled. Over 10%. That's a huge number. It's around 5 million. Mm-hmm. They think it doubled during the pandemic era. So I really think of this as a long, steady growth. That when I got in, it was maybe 0.5%, and then it grew year in, year out, driven by some of the problems in society. Mm-hmm. Remember, at the beginning of the century, we went to big-time testing in the schools, really, really strict, no child left behind, high-stakes testing. And while there's some good things about that, it's important to know how you're doing. In many cases, it was applied horribly, almost cruelly. There were teachers who would start the school year by terrifying the children. We've really got to bear down this year because this year there's going to be a test, and many of you will not make it to next year, will not make it to the next grade. You'll be held back. And they would use this as a motivational tool from day one. Now, there's a lot of kids that are somehow tough or somehow indifferent or somehow they just rise to that challenge and it works for. There's also lots of kids who aren't put together that way, and their reaction is to suffer and to be terrified. And then the next morning when it's time to go to school, they have stomach cramps and they haven't slept, and they really do badly in that sort of environment. So the over-testing was one of the things that really fueled homeschooling. There have been other health scares through the years. Of course, school violence has been in the news, and it's a terrible thing. But the real reason for the growth of homeschooling is because people like it. It works. And it's not as dreadfully hard as parents fear. This is the real thing about homeschooling. It's not just that they don't love the schools. It's when they look at the alternative, it's like, oh my goodness, this might be better. This is better for my child, and it's a lot better for our family. Yeah.
You kind of dispelled one of the myths that I think exists out there, that homeschooling is, something parents have to do on their own, that they need to drag themselves down to the library and become an expert at first grade curriculum and 8th grade curriculum and then come home and kind of wing it. But there are companies like yours and others around the country that provide curriculums and aids for the parents. Am I right about that?
That's exactly right. And Time4Learning is a leading player in that field. In fact, we're probably part of the reason that homeschooling has gotten so much easier. Look, when Time4Learning first came along, homeschooling was hard. These parents were pioneers. The legality of homeschooling wasn't always clear. the publishers who had a teacher's edition of a textbook wouldn't sell it to parents. Communities existed, but they're a little bit hard to find each other. There wasn't that much infrastructure. What's happened in the last 20 years is everything changed. Parents no longer actually have to teach their child day by day. Much of the heavy lifting of lesson planning, gathering resources, explaining things, having practice, having quizzes, keeping records. A lot of this heavy lifting can be done by a good online program like Time4Learning. So the parents aren't sitting there doing all this reinventing the wheel work. They are in this familiar environment where they sign up and there's a monthly subscription. It's pretty reasonable. It's $20 a month per child. And then the student now has all the lessons lined up, a stream of lessons. Following each lesson, and the lessons are short, just a minute or two. Following the lessons, there's all the exercises that a parent would like to have, that the student should have. Sometimes this helps them with retention. Often it helps them with applying the skill that they've just learned. Sometimes it will be critical thinking, sort of, so we said this, do you think it applies to this or it applies to that? But relatively sophisticated software that takes the kids through the materials, and at the end of every chapter, there'll be some sort of quiz or test, so the teacher, in this case the parent, will have a sense of how the child's doing. So the heavy lifting of basic education is taken care of by the program. What parents like this is they can use their energies and use their ideas to add value around it. So there's a few scenarios here. One is the child is really interested in something. They're reading something and they ask the parent about this, they ask the parent about that. Well, there's the launch pad that the parents want. The parents can start setting up field trips. They can start finding books. They can start thinking up some great project-based learning to capitalize on the authentic interest the student has shown in some topic. There's always also the other side, that there's children who will be having trouble with some topic. The parent can see that the report isn't that good, so the parent has to think about how to remediate and help the child address this area. The most obvious way is that you can always repeat lessons in Time4Learning. And if the child does it with the parent, often the parent will pick the lesson up a little quicker, see where the child hasn't gotten it, and help them get it. So, the parent doesn't have to do all the research. The information, the explanations are right there, and the parent can add value and move the child along. So there's always these two sides. Mm-hmm. There's both where you can go much further based on what interest the children are showing, and then there's the places where a child needs some motivation, some help, some remediation, some explanation. And again, the parent can use Time4Learning as the core resource to identify the areas and to address them. So homeschooling has become a much easier thing to do.
All right. So I know that there are a lot of parents out there that are screaming at their device right now saying, why didn't the public school that had to go virtual last year hook up with Time4Learning or another program like that? Why were my kids, did they have to be in front of a screen to see a teacher try to struggle to teach a lesson synchronously, and I wasn't involved, and then I had to come? Why did we go through this year of really, in a lot of places, dismal virtual learning? And when there are these resources available?
So it's a good question, and to many parents it's uppermost on their mind because a lot of kids have been through just terrible remote learning experiences. Let me also point out that that's too broad a brush to paint with. There are also kids, particularly in high school, who have used the remote learning opportunities in schools and done much better than they ever did when they were in the classroom. You take away the day-to-day, face-to-face social interactions, and there's kids who, when they get to focus on their studies, have done really well. The American educational system is a phenomenal thing. All these local school boards, all these local school systems, every school system gets to decide for themselves what they're going to do. Many of these school systems are dealing with teachers who care passionately about a lot of things, including standing up for their rights and the union. trying to retrain teachers nationwide from the day-to-day classroom activities that they signed up for and that they're skilled at doing, and teaching them to work in a remote environment. It was a monstrous task. Many school systems did a great job. Probably more school systems stumbled, tripped. They weren't equipped for it. They weren't ready for it. And all those same teachers, interesting enough, many of them are also parents. I've talked to some homeschool parents, and it turns out the mom is a teacher, and her day job is sitting there at the table teaching a classroom of students across the web. And at the same time, she has her two kids over on a table in the corner of the room, and she's homeschooling them with Time for Learning, which shows off a really interesting thing. Let's say you're a fourth grade teacher. Maybe you're a specialized fourth grade teacher. You're only teaching in that school language arts. Well, that teacher really knows fourth grade language arts and all the stuff to teach it. But when she's faced with educating a second grader across all the different subjects and a seventh grader across all the different subjects, she doesn't know what they're supposed to learn. Mm-hmm. I mean, how would she know? That's outside her area. So she pops them right on Time for Learning, and she watches out of the corner of her eye to make sure that they're paying attention and taking the breaks they're supposed to, because both are important. And then she too, when she's off remote learning with the classroom, will start looking at the reports on Time for Learning and seeing, where the kids deserve praise because they're really doing great work, and where the kids, got to ask some questions. Why are we having trouble with this? Mm-hmm. So it's, in terms of running schools, it's really hard. Those teachers have had a terribly hard time. They've been asked to do things they weren't equipped, trained, or very well supported for. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, they came through like heroes. In many cases, they didn't. I do want to make a forecast, and it's a little pessimistic, but I'll throw it out there because I think it's true. Many of us have noticed that restaurants and a lot of places now have these help wanted signs out there, that the sort of crummier jobs out there in the economy have been abandoned by people who took some time, looked around, and they found better jobs, better career paths, better remuneration, better pay. Teachers, too, in many parts of the country really are not very well paid. And in the modern era, they're not treated very well. Mm-hmm. The principal doesn't necessarily stand up for the teacher, and parents who are, trying to do best thing for the kid go right at the teachers complaining about things. And it's turned out to be a very stressful and difficult job and not very well paid. Well, a lot of those teachers, just like the people at restaurants and other places, have looked around and found better jobs. Mm-hmm. So my prediction over the next few years is that this is going to be one of the stories that we see in school after school. Parents are going to be furious. Hey, my third grader is on the fourth long-term substitute this year, and it's just November. And we all know that changing substitutes and changing teachers is the definition of bad education. I mean, mm-hmm. Part of the magic is having a teacher who tunes into you and knows you and all that. If it's a rotating cast, it's not good. So I fear for public education over the next few years as we try and figure out how to build a stable workforce again. But in light of the massive retirements and the number of people that have moved on, I think schools are really going to struggle to provide the quality, stable, well-trained workforce that our students deserve. Mm-hmm. Of course, this will continue to fuel homeschooling. So I suspect homeschooling will be a major part of the educational landscape for as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the things that I've heard people say is that homeschool kids, they come out and they're, well, like you and I were accused of being geeky and nerdy when we were doing magic. But that's one of the things I hear. Oh, homeschool kids, they don't have any opportunities to socialize, and they don't know how to get along with their peers.
That's a popular myth. There have been some TV programs and some spokesmen out there that have perpetuated that myth. And even though I'm now going to correct it, I suspect that myth will be around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Let me start with a joke. This is a popular joke in the homeschooling world, traditionally. What is the hardest thing about homeschooling?
Getting to class?
Answer turns out to be staying home. The reason is, in every community in the country at this point, there are lots of homeschooling groups. Once mom gets on the email list and starts looking at the opportunities every day, there's a co-op meeting, there's a field trip to the apiary, that's where they do bees. There's a field trip to this factory, so-and-so's mom works at that factory, and they've got a field trip for the kids to go in and see how they make this stuff. There's a science cooperative educational program. There's just endless opportunities to go off and do education. And how are you supposed to stay home and do your schoolwork when the world is full of all these opportunities to go out with other homeschooling families, other homeschooling kids, and do all these really cool educational things? It's hard to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
And the way a lot of families organize this is they stay home Monday through Thursday through 2 o'clock, and then in the afternoon they go off and socialize with other groups.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, look, the socialization is quite different. Public schools, of course, put kids in large groups. PE class, we put all the boys there and all the girls there. You might be in a class with 100 boys for PE and this and that. It's a certain type of socialization. It's unnatural in the sense that the only time you're ever put with 30 kids of your own age is in schools. It's not the way life is outside of schools. Homeschoolers will explain that, gosh, we socialize in a much more normal way. You've got sort of normal number of kids and normal number of parents, and we go socialize with other families that we get along with. It's some ways a little, you tend to self-select, so you tend to be a little less diverse in the people that you're dealing with, which, long-term is something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But the basic reality of homeschooling is it's not a solitary pursuit. You tend to do it in co-ops, communities, parent support groups, pods. There's all sorts of varieties. Now, during the last 2 years, the pandemic, it was for everyone. So much of this infrastructure had to be scaled down because, gosh, we have to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still there. And during the months that we weren't worried about the pandemic in the last 2 years, it sprang back to life and was revitalized by the vast numbers of new people that showed up. Mm-hmm. So it's there. And right now it all exists online. You can Google any community in the country and homeschooling, and you'll have a list of half a dozen or eight different groups to choose from. Let me throw out one other obvious thing about choosing a group. These groups have widely different angles. There'll be a group that's, we're interested in diversity and we're interested in very progressive education. There's another group that'll be affiliated with some church and, perhaps heavily follow the doctrines of that church. There'll be very diverse groups. When you're picking a homeschool group, expect to go visit 4 or 5 of them to find 1 or 2 that are like-minded and you're going to enjoy being with.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a little bit like dating. There's a lot of people you'll meet, maybe have a lot of respect for, but they're not for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So parents do have to pay a little attention and accept that there's lots of homeschooling groups that are perhaps not for them, and find the ones that are.
We've talked a lot here on the podcast about, that the education, it's set up to be a one-size-fit-all, even though there are special education programs for kids and individual education plans, but still, kids, they pretty much need a fit and they need to be able to excel in that traditional learning space. It sounds like homeschooling is a fantastic option for the parents who have the time and the resources to do it and can really tailor their child's education to make it the best that meets that kid's needs and interests.
So schools do struggle to deal with a classroom of students, but then to somehow track them to their interests and to the pace at which they work.
Mm-hmm.
They try hard. and the key to it is turned out to be software. It's very hard for a teacher to do. The reality is it's much easier for a parent to run a student-paced program. Look, you put me in a math class with a bunch of other kids in 5th grade. I'll look around. I'll tell you what's going on. Half the kids are bored out of their mind because the math is going too slow for them. They already know everything the teacher's going to talk about today, sort of at hello, because it's just a growth on what they did yesterday. And they're bored out of their mind. And they turn into behavior problems because they're just bored and want to show off or what have you. The other half of the class is struggling. They're having trouble keeping up. They're feeling a little stupid. It's depressed. Some of them will get really depressed and just put their head down on the desk and stop learning. I mean, they didn't really follow yesterday. Today they're on to new stuff. I mean, trying to teach the average kid in the class frustrates both sides. Now, what's funny is when you switch to language arts, everybody gets shuffled around. Now, some of the kids who, found it really boring are having trouble because their linguistic skills might not be as strong. And the other kids who, perhaps found the math really hard, they're shining because they really have skill with words and metaphors and imagery. But school days in that sense are stressful for kids. There's this predetermined pace at which you're supposed to move, and teachers try as hard as they can to adapt it to all the diversity in the room, but it's really hard. It is much easier for a parent who just puts the children on the software, and if the child wants to repeat today's lesson because they really didn't get it, it's easy to do. If the kid wants to move a lot faster because they're whipping through it, you can do it. In many ways, software-based education, which adapts to the student's pace, is better education. Now, schools are learning this too. Slowly, I think schools will adopt many of the techniques and the reality of what we've learned in the homeschooling world. There's an expression that I remember about the future that people say. The future is usually already here. It's just lurking somewhere in the shadows. And I think much of the future of education is going to come out of homeschooling. For instance, homeschoolers have used computers one-to-one for a long time. But until the pandemic, it was still newsworthy and a big discussion point. Should we have one computer for each child, or can we just rotate all the computers around and they use it for some fraction of the day? Well, since the pandemic, the schools have gone to one-to-one. Student-paced learning, where the teacher plays or the parent plays more of a cheerleader, mentor, find resources and orchestrate resources role. That's the way it works in homeschooling, and it works really well. These kids do generally well in education. In school, we're still focused on the stage, the sage on the stage. So a teacher who is the content expert and is standing there delivering the content to the students. Now, while that has some value, and it's fantastic when the teacher is magic and well organized and can write clearly on the board, it's also often terrible. A teacher who gets confused, who isn't that good at presenting. Often you can do better with a high quality, well-produced video presenting the material and just use the teacher as a resource for when the students are having trouble. So that's the whole concept of flipped classrooms, which some schools do, but right now it's still relatively rare. The schools are still built around the teacher as the sage on the stage, explaining everything to the students. But I think we'll move to where a lot of the instruction happens through software and the teacher adds value around it. In short, a homeschool technique will move into schools and become a major technique. Yeah. And there'll be a whole bunch of other homeschool ideas that I think schools will eventually adopt, but slowly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I can talk to you forever because this is something that's, education is something that's been very important to our family. My beautiful wife was one of the many teachers who just retired after 34 years in the classroom. My daughter made the decision to earn her college degree 100% online, and it was a fantastic choice for her, the very best choice she could have made, I think. And I think that this area is something, homeschooling could be the answer for lots and lots of families. I agree with you. I think it is going to grow. It's amazing how much it's grown so far. John, tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about Time for Learning.
Okay, so Time4Learning.com is right there on the web. It's time, the numeral 4, learning.com. For the parents that are thinking of homeschooling, let me share some of the observations I've had for so many others just like you. First of all, it's a scary decision. Your child's future, your child's education is very important. And this means stepping out of what you grew up expecting and what you did. I understand that it's scary. Secondly, almost everyone decides to homeschool to try it. They decide, okay, we'll try it for this semester. We'll try it for this school year. Almost everybody decides, it's just a provisional decision for the short term, and we'll see how it goes. After that, an awful lot of people decide, well, we'll try a second year. We'll try a third year. An awful lot of people in the modern world have homeschooled for between 4 and 6 years. Do they eventually burn out? Are they eventually ready for a change? Yeah, a lot of parents do. It restricts what the parent can do because you got to be home with the kids. The kids get involved with all sorts of friends, but of course it's not a massive, massive group. And at some point you want to switch around. So a lot of parents homeschool for 4 or 6 years. And then they decide, okay, for high school or for the last 2 years, let's put the kid back in school. An awful lot of other finish all the way through. I'll tell you one thing I've never heard. I've yet to hear one parent who didn't say, yeah, homeschooling was great. I'm so glad that I did it. I've never yet heard a parent express any regret that homeschooling wasn't one of the best parenting decisions and experiences they ever made. It's a fantastic adventure. You get to get really involved with your children. All the dreams you have to sort of guide them about reading and guide them on this and take them and show them that. Things you might want to learn, they become available. And in the modern world, you can do all the value-added stuff, leaving much of the heavy lifting to a program like Time4Learning. Yeah. That's where we're really proud that we've helped so many people.
Yeah. And one of the things, we've said over and over again for those parents who are out there thinking, I can't be my kid's teacher. You already have been your child's you were your child's first teacher. You're the most important teacher. And if this is something you want to look into, you got it. You can do it. John, we've had a great time speaking. We have a great time speaking to the driving force, the founder of Time4Learning.com, John Edelson. Hey, John, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, Jed, thank you very much. It's been great fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Megan Preston Meyer will be on the podcast to celebrate Supply Jane Clears the Way, a children's book series about the supply chain. It's fascinating. Talk about a timely topic. You don't want to miss it. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, John Edelson. Please be sure to check out Time4Learning. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.